Hello and welcome to Your Health in Your Hands. I'm Dr. David Ajibade with the Brain and Body Foundation. Now, a few years ago, we embarked on this series called Why Blacks Die First, in which I highlighted the fact that Blacks, unfortunately, that unfortunate fact that Blacks tend to have higher rates of certain chronic diseases, such as hypertension, heart disease, strokes, diabetes, some autoimmune conditions, and of course, cancers. As a matter of fact, Blacks reign supreme when it comes to things like prostate cancer, breast cancer, and probably cervical cancer as well. It seems to be a lot worse. And so we kind of gave reasons as to why Blacks tend to have it worse than white people do. And it goes beyond that. Remember, too, we were talking about this when COVID-19 first came on the scene, how in some parts of Sweden, they did a study and they found out that there were communities of Somalian refugees that were almost completely wiped out by COVID-19. And if you can think about this, Somalians are Black. They are very, very dark. I think they're among the darkest people on the planet. And they live in a high altitude area that's really north in Sweden, where you hardly ever see the sun, like 3 months in a year. And even when it comes out, it's not always shining as brightly as it should. And maybe in somewhere like sub-Saharan South Africa is nowhere near close to the sunlight and the heat that they get or we get in sub-Saharan Africa. And so the Somalians, their communities were being ravaged by this disease. And they were pointing to the fact that lower levels of vitamin D3 could have been part of the problem, which made the Somalians so susceptible. And of course, there might be other factors as well. But the point being that they were Blacks in the white community and they were more heavily hit. Same thing in the US. I think close to 40% of the deaths and the more severe cases were among Black people. Meanwhile, Black people are like 13% of the overall population of the US. So you can tell, you don't have to be an epidemiologist to tell that it's skewed towards Black people. Same thing with all these other diseases that we talked about. So when we started looking into dementia and brain disorders and memory loss issues, it made sense for us also to begin to see, okay, is there any discrepancy between Blacks and whites? And sure enough, we began to see it. As a matter of fact, Blacks have it worse, surprise, surprise, when it comes to things like Alzheimer's, dementia, and other brain conditions like Parkinson's disease, like strokes, and so on and so forth. And so in this session, of this episode, we're going to be looking into why that is so, and hopefully just kind of tease out a few things, because it's so important that we understand this. Things like dementia and Alzheimer's disease don't just jump on you. There are things that have been happening over a period of time, 20 years, 30 years. So if you're in your 30s and 40s now, you're probably doing things, whether wittingly or unwittingly, that are putting you on a collision course with dementia in your 60s and 70s. So you need to pay a lot of attention to this. If you are on TV now, please call your friends, call family in the different states in Nigeria, ask them to get on and watch this show. Your life might depend on it. God bless. See you soon. Welcome back. So why do Black people tend to have it worse when it comes to dementia and Alzheimer's disease and all these other conditions that affect people in their older age? One of the obvious ones, as we alluded to when it came to the Somalians in COVID-19, was vitamin D3 deficiency. Vitamin D3 deficiency. I mean, we've screamed about this before the COVID came in, during the COVID, and after the COVID. We've been saying this. Please take your vitamin D. If you were to test your levels, it's about 25,000, I think, to test. So it's probably going to be expensive for most people, but you don't need to test it if you're Black. Even if you're living a middle income life, let's say you're middle class and above, you're most likely not going to be outside in the sun with your shirt off. So you're most likely going to be deficient in vitamin D. And if you live in the US or in the UK or in the Western world, where this summer is over and this and autumn or fall is here, going towards winter, you are almost definitely vitamin D deficient. So you just want to supplement with vitamin D. I always recommend between 5,000 and 10,000. I take multiple times that, and I've been doing that for many years. I'm still okay, but I do not recommend that for everyone. I just know it, and I've tested my vitamin D levels, and the vitamin D levels are really, really good. So you want to take vitamin D. We have found out that vitamin D is especially important for the brain as well. And so if you over 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, your vitamin D levels are low, it stands to reason that by the time you get into your 70s and 80s, that's cumulative effect of the deficiency of vitamin D is going to come back and bite you in the you know what. And so you're going to see weaknesses. Those weaknesses have built up over the years, and it's going to affect your brain function, your brain structure, your brain function, and so on and so forth. But that's an easy one. I wanted to just throw that one out first and foremost. The second reason we're seeing why Black people tend to have it worse when it comes to dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And as a quick reminder, dementia is a brain disorder in which long-term damage to the brain causes things like memory loss, defects in behavior, defects in social communication, and altogether just defects in brain function. So that's kind of like what dementia is, and there are different kinds of dementia. All right, so chronic disease is the other reason why people have dementia. And it seems like it's these same chronic diseases that we told you that Black people are more susceptible to. For instance, heart disease, hypertension, strokes. If you had multiple strokes in the past, it's a problem. If you have diabetes over a long period of time, the chances of you having dementia are so much greater. Even if you've had cancer that was treated, because of the use of chemotherapy and radiotherapy, those things can also cause repeated damage to the brain, which in your latter years can affect you. So chronic means a long term. Chronic disease is one of the topmost risk factors for dementia in your 70s and 80s. And I think you can understand that too. And then I'm going to take it a step further. I've mentioned insulin resistance in the past. We'll probably do an entire episode on insulin resistance. Well, insulin resistance is when your cells are not readily taking in glucose, or they're not readily responding to insulin, which allows you to take in glucose. So if your cells aren't taking in insulin, if they're not taking in glucose levels rise. But also the insulin levels rise because the body is thinking, or the pancreas is thinking, why aren't these cells responding to me? And so the pancreas continues to pump out more and more insulin. So again, your sugar levels are high, your insulin levels are high. The combination of these two things can be a big problem, but the insulin problem, some say is even worse than the sugar problem, believe it or not. And the brain especially has to respond to insulin. And the brain is not responding to insulin, which is a problem on its own. So it's a combination of high sugar levels and high insulin levels. Therefore, insulin resistance can lead to dementia. We're beginning to see that as well. So that's chronic disease as another factor. Now, here are two other factors that are not as emphasized, in my opinion, as they should be. And maybe it's because people want to be politically correct and they don't want to offend people. But we're finding out that your level of education, especially in the younger years, so they see that people who have had like 16 years of continuous education seem to be a lot more protected from dementia than those who probably never learned how to read well or never learned how to calculate math, who, in other words, have not had their brains tasked over and over and over again. Remember the old saying that says that use it or lose it? Well, it applies to the brain as well. It also applies to the body, obviously, and we're going to get to that. But the brain is like a muscle. It has to be exercised. It has to be stretched. It has to be tasked. And if you're not tasking the brain, especially in the younger years, your teenage years, your 20s, your 30s, when your brain is vibrant, it seems like that lack of vigor or rigor, that lack of rigor in the earlier years can leave your brain a little weaker in the future. Because one of the things that rigor and one of the things academics does, and reading and studying and thinking, is that it helps to form synapses, multiple connections between brain cells, kind of like in a forest. The trees kind of like have their root systems intertwined with each other. So even when there's a very, very strong wind or tornado or whatever it is, they are less likely to be to fall over because they are all supporting each other. Same thing with synapses. The more synapses there are, the more connections between brain cells, the more likely the brain is the more resilient, let's put it that way, the more resilient the brain will be. And we know that by studying and exercising the brain continuously throughout life, there is some level of protection. Obviously, there are many professors who have dementia, so it's not like it's a full complete protection. Now, let me tell you about the next one. The next one is physical activity. And the more rigorous the activity is, the better. Some people say just walking regularly is a really good protection. But we want to take it a step further. And we want to say that those who have strong muscles and who are exercising their muscles regularly, who are stretching their muscles, not just walking. Walking is important too. And that's why in the US, we're beginning to see in the US that even in these retirement homes, they have them push them to lift weights. I'm not saying they're going to be like the Arnold Schwarzenegger, but they're encouraging them to strain their muscles on a regular basis. Why is that important? Well, not only does it help to build stronger bones and stronger muscles, they are finding out that activity, that stretching and straining of the muscles releases certain chemicals from the muscles to the brain. They're called myokines, myokines. They're called myokines. These chemicals enter the bloodstream, they get to the brain, and they are helpful in stimulating memory, long-term memory, short-term memory, and also stimulating the formation of brain cells, also in stimulating the connection of brain cells, neurons between neurons. So it's really, really, really important. Now, I say these two things because, as you know, we Black people tend not to be as physically active as the white people, especially in the Western worlds. I was arguing with my friend about one day, and I was saying that, well, you know, we're not taking this exercise and physical activity things as seriously as we should. And he was arguing back. It's like, how do you know that? I'm like, well, one of the reasons is that I don't see health centers, I don't see physical fitness centers and gyms around much. And he was like really upset. He was like, well, what makes you think that cannot be the yardstick to measure whether or not people are physically active? And it may not be, but I said, well, do you think this country, Nigeria, is very religious? Of course, yes, probably one of the most religious countries on the planet. I'm like, and he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, how can you tell? You can see a church around almost every corner, and mosques as well. So you see churches and mosques everywhere. So that's the outward indication that people are very, very involved in this activity. The same thing with gyms and health centers and health and fitness centers. If you're not seeing, I know in Abuja, most of the health and fitness centers are beyond the reach of the average person. They're a lot more expensive, except if you're in the military where the squash courts are free. So it hasn't become a part of our zeitgeist or our lifestyle as much as it should. And same thing with parks, same thing with running trails. There should be running trails. I remember when in the US, I would see running trails, people on bicycles for miles upon end, and these trails are actually created for that purpose, not to drive your car, but to ride your bicycle. So these are things that we don't see as much Black people involved in. Same thing, unfortunately, with reading. They're looking at the level, even back to primary school and secondary school, the level of education amongst the Black communities is unfortunately a lot lower than that amongst the white communities. Of course, you can extrapolate that in Africa as well. There's a high degree of illiteracy as well. Now, the thing is, we don't really live as long as people in the US. So like the average age is like 77. Average health span is about, I think about 80 now in the US. In Nigeria, it's still about 53, 54. Hopefully it's going to get longer than that very soon. But dementia usually happens around the age of 65. So that's a lot later. Now, if for some miraculous reason our lifespan just was boosted to about 64, 65, you probably would be seeing a lot more dementia. It's because people are dying a lot earlier these days than in the Western world. That's why we're not seeing that much dementia. But I guarantee you, when people start living longer and longer, you're going to be seeing a lot more dementia. I'm already beginning to see it. I'm having people call me and having to talk with people, having to help people whose parents or grandparents are living with dementia. I can see it on the horizon. This is coming. It's coming very, very quickly. So please, the moral of the story or the lesson here is that you want to get active. You want to get active mentally. You want to get active socially. You want to get active physically as well. And don't forget to strain. There's something to be said for tasking your muscles as well as tasking your brain. All right, there are a few other reasons why Black people tend to have dementia worse than white people, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. So do not go away. See you soon. Welcome back. Another reason why Black people tend to have it worse than white people where dementia is concerned is the obvious reason of poverty, whether it's in Nigeria, other parts of Africa, or in the Western world. That poverty leads to a couple of things. It reduces your access to quality healthcare. I mean, if you can't pay for even the transportation to get to a hospital, you're not going to be able to see a neurologist. Now, the other thing, obviously, that poverty does is that poverty prevents you from education. So we talked about education. Yeah, you're not as enlightened as the person who has access to funds or to resources, obviously. So you won't know about these things. And because you're poor, you may not be able to, even if you knew about these things, you're not going to be able to act on these things. For instance, I mentioned vitamin D earlier. There's no way you're going to get enough vitamin D, short of staying in the sun naked 3 to 4 hours a day between the hours of 10 a.m. and maybe 3 p.m. or 2 p.m. You're not going to get vitamin D. So you've got to take a supplement, and supplements cost money. So you got to take that. And it's not just vitamin D that's a supplement. You need zinc, you need vitamin C, you need magnesium, you need omega-3s, and you need the right kind of omega-3s. Omega-3s are one of the most important things for your brain. It helps to protect your brain. And it's not cheap. You've got some low quality ones and you've got some high quality ones. As I mentioned to you before, the best omega-3s that we use in our clinic cost $100. That's like 70,000 or is it 80,000? I don't know. I think the dollar rate came to about 900 naira to a dollar at one point. So that's like 90,000 naira for one bottle. We were giving these things out like they were candy for a long time. And that's how we started our foundation. And that's because we were fortunate enough to have donations of omega-3s. We don't have those donations anymore. But the point is that omega-3s are expensive. They're really good kinds of omega-3s. And so poverty might prevent you from taking advantage of that. Obviously, you can always reach out to us in the clinic and we can help in one way or the other, especially for your child. Speaking about diet, the brain needs specific nutrients. You should be able to get a good diet, some of these nutrients from your foods, especially plant-based foods that have a lot of these protective chemicals, brain protective chemicals, but they have to be raw. They have to be eaten raw, like in salads. Most of the times in Nigeria and Africa, in fact, we cook everything. We cook out of our foods, and we really cook them. And the next day we keep on warming, and I mean, we drive the nutrients out of the foods. Most of the foods that provide healthy nutrients for the brain are raw. And so that's a problem. And I think culturally too, I remember there was one pastor who said that his grandmother told him that the only things that eat leaves and, referring to salads, are goats and sheep. Goats and sheep. So there's this kind of like, we look down on raw foods. Raw foods are some of the most important things for our brains and our bodies. All right. So we talked about poverty. Another thing would be employment. There's a high, less employment in African countries, especially among the youth. Think about that. If the kids, if youth in their 20s and their 30s are not actively engaged at work, actively tasking their brains, that's another thing that can make you more susceptible to, another thing that can make you more susceptible to brain conditions in the long term. Remember, we talked about it. You have to strengthen your muscles. You have to strengthen your muscles. You have to strengthen your brain so that your brain can serve you in the future. So that's poverty. That's diets. We've talked about access as well. So what do you do with all this? What's there? I mean, how do you protect yourself? I always like to think about the easiest thing, the things that you can apply for yourself on a long-term basis, on a very long-term basis, because of, like we said, brain damage happens over a long period of time. So you want to be able to protect your brain over a long period of time. So I'm going to throw out a few things that I feel that everybody who is listening to me right now should be doing for their brains. Yes, you're going to exercise at least 3 times a week. Get out on, if the least you can do is walk, then walk for about 30 minutes. Obviously, you have to be careful where you walk. And it's kidnapping and all that, you got to watch out for that. So walking, you want to do a lot more walking. Yeah, you want to engage in more reading. And then you want to avoid, especially if you're over 40, over 32. Fried foods, processed foods that you obviously know are not going to be good for you. They have a lot of chemicals, they have a lot of toxic kinds of fat. Then on top of that, I've said this over and over again, I'll say it again, you want to be taking 5,000 to 10,000 international units of vitamin D. The research is out. That's what will help you as a Black person. And if you're concerned about calcium overload, then take vitamin K2 in addition to vitamin D. If you don't know where to get that, just reach out to us. Send us an email or send us a WhatsApp chat. Vitamin D. After vitamin D, you want to take vitamin B complex. The most important vitamins in the vitamin B complex range are B1, B6, and B12. B1, B6, and B12. As a matter of fact, some forms of dementia, they are linking it directly. And they found out that simply by supplementing with B1, in some cases with B12, they've seen a complete reversal of the dementia just by giving those B vitamins. But some people say that B vitamins should be called brain vitamins. All right, so that's that. You also want to take zinc. I understand, and we've seen that zinc is probably one of the most important minerals for the brain. You also want to take magnesium. So if you combine these, and then vitamin C, I would say I recommend vitamin C every single day. It's so important for everything from your bones to your brain. So let's go over them again. Vitamin C, vitamin D3, plus or minus vitamin K2, the B vitamins, and zinc and magnesium. And if you can afford it, you want to take omega-3s on a regular basis as well. If you take these 3, and this is probably going to come to a little 10,000, 20,000 a month. And again, if you want to find out where we can get some good sources, some really good quality supplements that are not too expensive, just reach out to us. So these 5 or 6 things would significantly help you. And of course, don't forget to sleep well. You want to sleep in a dark room. One of the things they are saying is that amyloid plaques, which are related to dementia, they tend to accumulate more when you don't sleep well enough. So you need about 6, 7, 8 hours a day. If you can't get that, but whatever happens, make sure you cover your eyes. You want to sleep in complete darkness. And of course, no noise as well, but complete darkness is so important for your brain to properly shut down and do the work of repairing, detoxifying, regenerating itself as you sleep. So I hope that serves you. Remember, you can always reach out to us. Our website is brainandbodyfoundation.org. And we're on all the social media platforms, and we are, let's see what else, on YouTube as well. So if you want to watch some of our old videos, please reach out to us. That's it for now. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, practice health principles. Stay safe.